At 19, she was sent, still pure, to the giant mountain man. What he did made everyone stunned. The stagecoach jolted to a stop, dust swirling in the crisp mountain air. Nora stepped down carefully, her boots landing on the rocky ground of Briar Ridge, a frontier town nestled against the vast Montana wilderness. At 19, with nothing but a small trunk and a folded letter in her coat pocket, she had arrived at what was promised to be her new life. The letter from her uncle back east had been short and clear. "You'll be taken care of. He's a man of the mountains. Rough hands, but steady. A good match for a girl with no prospects." No signature of affection, just instructions. After her parents' death, she'd been passed between relatives until this, a mail-order marriage arranged without her say. But she'd clung to the idea of safety, of finally belonging somewhere. She looked around the tiny town. A few wooden buildings stood crooked against the hills. Locals paused, staring. Whispers passed between them. A girl alone always drew attention, especially one so clearly out of place. She waited, clutching her coat tighter. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The man she was meant to marry, she only knew his name, Mr. Harlan Tate, was nowhere to be seen. A shopkeeper finally stepped out, wiping his hands on his apron. "You the girl come for Tate?" "Yes," Nora said, voice steady despite the chill in her chest. "Nora Calhoun." The man's face darkened. "You'd best come inside, miss." Inside the dry goods store, with the scent of flour and tobacco heavy in the air, he broke the news. Harlan Tate had died 3 weeks ago in a hunting accident. "No one thought to write, I suppose," he added awkwardly. "Didn't know he was expectin' a wife." Nora said nothing. Her hands tightened on the letter in her pocket. She'd traveled across the country. For this? Back outside, the townsfolk watched her like a curiosity. Some looked pitying, others suspicious. A voice rang out behind her. "What's a girl like you doing alone?" She turned. A man leaned against the post near the saloon, grinning too wide. Dirty hat, crooked teeth. "I'm just waiting on someone," she said quickly, edging away. "Someone who ain't comin'," he said, stepping forward. "Reckon you could use a warm place tonight. I got a room." Nora backed up, heart pounding. No one moved to stop him. Until a shadow passed between them. The man stiffened, his grin faltering. He looked up, at the towering figure now standing beside Nora. Logan McGraw. He was a giant of a man, with a thick beard and eyes like stone. He didn't speak, he didn't raise a hand. He just stood there, silently, and stared. The other man muttered, "Didn't mean no harm," and slunk away. Nora looked up at her unexpected protector. "Thank you," she said softly. Logan nodded once, then turned to walk away. "Wait," she called. Did you know Harlan Tate?" He paused, then answered in a low voice, rough as gravel. "I hunted with him sometimes." She hesitated. "Do you know where I could stay? Just until I figure things out?" He studied her for a long moment, then finally said, "I've got space, but it's on the mountain." Nora glanced back at the staring eyes, the half smirks. "Then the mountain sounds just fine," she said. He didn't smile, but he waited while she picked up her trunk. And without another word, they began the climb toward a place neither of them yet knew would change everything. Logan McGraw did not return to town for praise or thanks. By the time the sun dipped low, streaking the valley with gold, he was already hitching his mule to the small supply cart behind the general store. Nora stood with her satchel clutched tight, still uncertain whether to speak. "You coming?" Logan asked, voice like gravel rolled smooth by rain. She blinked. You are not the man I was supposed to marry." "No," he said simply. "I was his neighbor, knew Barrett for years. He talked about bringing a bride out, said you were coming. Then he got sick." Nora looked down at the dusty toe of her shoe. "He never mentioned he had a friend like you." "Most do not," Logan said, almost like a joke, though his face remained unreadable. She hesitated. "What am I supposed to do now?" Logan did not offer platitudes. Instead, he said, "You can come up the mountain. I got a second cot in my cabin. It is not a home, but it is dry." Nora frowned. "Why would you help me?" He glanced up at the looming ridge above the town, its pines black against the fading sky. "Because no one else will, and I would not leave a dog in Clearwater overnight." The ride up was cold and steep. The trail twisted like a serpent through thick trees, over creaking bridges, past glacial streams still laced with ice. The mule cart creaked, and Logan walked beside it, silent except for the occasional "watch your step" or "hold on tight." By the time they reached his cabin, stars had pierced the sky like pinholes in velvet. The structure was rough-hewn but solid, built with thick pine logs and a sloped tin roof. A single lantern flickered inside. He pushed the door open. "It is not much." To Nora, it looked like something out of a tale. There were antlers hung by the window, dried herbs strung over the hearth, and pelts folded by a small cast-iron stove. But what struck her most was the care in its arrangement. Clean dishes stacked neatly, a bucket of kindling beside the door, a cot in the corner, made up with a wool blanket, and across the room, another cot, set apart, with its own blanket and a folded flannel shirt placed atop. "That one is yours," Logan said, nodding toward it. "You can change behind the canvas screen." Nora walked in slowly, trailing her fingers over the wooden beams. "Do you live here all alone?" He nodded once. "Just me, and the mountain." As he fed logs into the stove, Nora sat on the edge of her cot. Her mind buzzed with questions she was too tired to ask. That night, the mountain cold seeped through the walls, and the wind howled like something alive. Nora woke to a sound she had never heard before, a deep, distant cry that raised the hairs on her arms. She slipped from the cot, barefoot, her heart pounding. At the window, she saw movement, shadows gliding among trees. The howl came again. Wolves. She stepped back, panic rising in her throat. Her breath turned fast and shallow. She turned toward the door. Logan appeared, silent as always, blocking the doorway like a tree. He saw the fear in her eyes. "They won't come close," he said calmly. "Not with the fire going." "But what if they do?" she whispered. He walked to the stove, stoked the embers. "They do not bother me." Nora shook her head. "How do you sleep through that?" "I sleep light." Her voice cracked. "I do not feel safe." He walked over, slow and deliberate, then sat on a stool a good few feet from her cot. He drew his long rifle from where it leaned against the wall and set it across his lap. "I sleep with this," he said, "and I do not point it at what is inside my cabin." Nora stared at him. "My gun always points out, never in." The words settled in the silence like falling snow, soft but heavy. She sat down slowly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Her breathing began to slow. Logan nodded once, satisfied, then stood. "I will be outside a bit. Wood needs chopping." He left without another word, boots crunching in the frost. Nora remained at the edge of the cot, watching the door, and for the first time that day, her heart stopped racing. Something about the mountain man, his quiet strength, his steady presence, felt more real than any letter she had clutched all those miles. That night, she did not sleep much, but she did not try to run again. Over the following days, Nora watched Logan quietly, like one might watch a flame steady in wind. The forest was full of whispers, and she knew she would never fully understand this man, but she wanted to try. She began taking small steps to make the cabin feel less like a shelter and more like home. In the morning light, she planted wildflower seeds in a tin can and tucked them near the window. She mended the torn sleeve of his shirt, needle passing through thick cloth with care. She baked cornbread over the wood stove, the warm aroma filling the tight space. She swept the hearth and arranged his tools neatly. Logan often watched her from the doorway, his silhouette framed in the dim light. He said little, but his eyes, sharp, pale green, followed every motion. One evening, Nora discovered a kettle cracked and leaking. She fussed over it, trying to patch it with resin and wire, but fumbled. He appeared behind her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and quietly replaced it with a spare kettle. She looked up, embarrassed. When she stoked the fire late one night, she found a small wooden stool set beside her cot. Previously, the only chair had been next to his own. And by dawn, she would often find a mug of hot water waiting where she Saturday. Every act, small, unseen, like kindness hidden in a snowflake. One gray afternoon, just as shadows lengthened, a rider arrived from the town below, stopping at the cabin. He handed Nora a folded letter and said, "You should answer this. Town demands it." Without another word, he left. Dread and curiosity mingled as she opened it. The letter was from the Women's Benevolent Society of Clearwater. In careful ink, it accused her of living in open scandal, by staying with a man unmarried, demanding she be taken back to her supposed patron's home in the East. The letter warned she had 6 days to appear before the society or be publicly censured. Nora's breath caught, her fingers trembled over the paper. Logan looked up from his work, expression unreadable. After a long silence, he rose and walked to her side. He took the letter and crumpled it in his palm. His voice was low but burning. "They have no right," he said. "You will not answer to them." She tried to protest. "What if they force me?" He turned. His face was set like granite. "Let them try. I will protect you." For a moment, she saw fire in his eyes, not the cold mountain rage she had been warned about, but righteous anger. He slammed the letter to the floor and stepped over it. He moved toward the door, then paused, hand on the latch. "I will go into town tomorrow," he said. "I will make them understand you are under my protection. Go nowhere until then." She reached for him, voice shaking. "Logan." He looked at her, softening slightly. "Rest now," he said. "Let them come. I will show them a different kind of strength." That night, Nora lay awake, listening to the wind rasp through pines, waiting for silence to swallow her fear. Across the room, Logan sat awake too, head bent. In the following days, Nora found her courage growing. She tended her seedlings despite cold nights. She mended extra clothing, cooked for Logan when his meals had grown sporadic. She learned to carry water from the creek and split wood, weakly, but with heart. Logan watched. Once, he caught her struggling with a coal shovel. He strode in, took it, and gently adjusted her grip. Another time, he found his chair moved closer to the hearth and pushed it a few inches nearer so she would feel warmth. They went days without speaking of the letter, but its weight lay between them. On a dawn before he planned to go to town, Logan caught her before she slipped outside. "Stay," he said. "No need for you to walk into their voices." She shook her head. "I cannot hide while you defend me. I will go too." He looked at her, then placed a hand on her arm. The touch, gentle, said more than any words. "Very well," he said. "We go together." He offered his arm, and she took it. Together, they walked toward the door, stepping into uncertainty as one. The dawn was pale and brittle when Nora awoke. Cold clung to the windows, and the hearth embers glowed faintly. She sat on the edge of her cot, hands clasped, heart uneasy with words long held back. Logan stirred across the room. Light slanted across rough pine walls. She cleared her throat. "Logan, there is something you should know," she said, voice small. He turned, waiting. "I was never meant to be a true bride," she said, looking down. "My uncle, he arranged a marriage with a mountain man I never knew. It was his way of passing responsibility. My parents died when I was 15. He did not want the burden. When I arrived, I was supposed to be claimed, welcomed. Instead, I found myself alone." Logan stayed silent, his gaze steady. She swallowed. "My father was a judge back east. He sentenced a man, Marcus Tate, who swore revenge. After they hanged him, his brother came after us. He burned our farm, hurt our neighbors, terrorized our town. We fled, changed names, moved west. But the man who died here was connected to him." She paused. "So, when my uncle offered me marriage as a safeguard, I accepted out of fear. But the man died before I arrived. I came here trusting in a letter, and found betrayal instead." Logan took a slow breath and looked away. "I lost my family long ago," he said quietly. "I was a soldier in the border wars. My brother died in a raid. My parents too, when our home was burned. I carried a rifle and moved west to forget the names of those I loved." Nora's eyes widened. You never speak of your past." He nodded. "Because pain speaks too often. I wanted only silence, but when I saw you, alone in a strange place, I recognized that fear." The room felt smaller, quieter. Dust drifted in a shaft of light. Nora touched her sleeve and looked up. He stepped closer. "I know your past now. I know what you have lost. And I understand you came not for love but for shelter. But I promise, here, you will not lose yourself again." She breathed in sharply. Her heart beat faster. The space between them no longer felt so wide. That afternoon, Logan suggested they descend into town. "You deserve to face them," he said, "to show them who you are." Nora hesitated. The letter from the Women's Society still stung. When they arrived, the hall was half full. Townspeople sat stiff and silent. The Women's Benevolent Society wore stern faces. A matron with tight hair stood as they entered. Logan guided Nora to the front. He cleared his throat. The room fell still. "My name is Logan McGraw. I have no claim on this woman by law, but by conscience, I take it now. If any believe she lives in impropriety, speak to me. She is under my roof. I shelter her. I will speak for her." His words rang clear. Women shifted. Men lowered their eyes. The matron opened her mouth, then shut it again. The society judge said nothing. Nora's throat tightened. Logan stood beside her, tall, calm, a wall of quiet strength. The judgment in the hall wavered. Murmurs rose. No one opposed him aloud. Something had shifted. Outside, she looked at him. "Why did you do that?" He touched her shoulder. "Because you deserve someone to say your name without shame. Because no one should carry blame for others' sins. Because I trust you." Tears slipped down her cheek. She turned away. He let her lean into his side as they walked back toward the ridge, toward the mountain that now felt less lonely. That night, she lay on her cot, thinking of the silence he had broken for her. Outside, the wind moaned. But beside her, his heartbeat was steady, like a promise. Night settled deep over the mountain and valley when the danger arrived. Nora had nearly drifted to sleep when she heard a muffled footstep outside the cabin. The moon cast pale reflections through the window, and she froze. Logan was already standing, rifle across his back, every muscle taut. He motioned gently for her to stay quiet. Outside, a voice hissed her name, sharp and mocking. "Nora, come out, girl. Let's finish what your father started." Her heart hammered. She recognized the voice. Marcus Tate's brother, believed executed, but rumors had always lingered. Logan moved to her door and slid the bolt closed. He crossed to the window and peered into the dark, then began tightening every latch she had barely noticed before. He placed a board over the lower half of the window, blocking view. He whispered, "Trust me, do not move." He turned and found her behind him, eyes wide. He held up a finger and began pulling a hidden trapdoor in the floor where he stored extra gear. In the shadows of the hearth, she watched him place powder, spare ammo, a knife. Beyond the door, the intruder called again, louder. His voice cracked with rage. "You think hiding with that mountain beast will save you? She's mine!" Logan's jaw clenched. He walked to the front door, opened it a crack, peered out, then slammed it shut. The taunt echoed through the night. "We'll meet where your woods are darkest." Logan glanced back at Nora with a steady gaze. "Stay hidden until I return," he said. Without waiting for answer, he strode out into the night. She pressed herself against the wall, pulse frantic, listening as his boots receded into shadow. Outside, voices, footsteps on gravel, the intruder's laugh, a rasping threat. Logan led him away, deeper into the woods. He knew every ridge, every fallen log. He guided the enemy over uneven terrain, into darkness away from the cabin. Once, Nora heard a distant gunshot echo above the groaning pines. Time stretched. She waited in silence. The wind whispered, leaves rustled. She dared not breathe. Then Logan returned. He stumbled through the door, coat torn, blood soaking his shoulder, but his face held a grim smile. He nodded at her and said, "You are safe." She flew to him, panic mixing with relief. She dropped to her knees, touching his wound. "Logan, you shouldn't have." He raised her hand gently. "I told you I would protect you. That was the point." He set her softly aside, then turned and locked the door. He pushed heavy furniture in front of it, barricading it further. Every move deliberate, caring. He fetched water, cleaned the wound with trembling hands, wrapped cloths tight. All the while, he refused her touch until he deemed the bleeding stilled. When he finally sat beside her, he met her eyes. "I lost too much already. You will not be one of those losses." His voice cracked with more feeling than he ever allowed before. They sat in the dim cabin, the wound grim but held. Outside, the forest held its breath, as if waiting for dawn. Nora clung to his strength, realizing that this mountain man would fight storms, wolves, even ghosts from her past for her safety. She touched his cheek. "You risked your life." He exhaled softly, and his lips curved an exhausted smile. "Better you than me, but if that is the bargain of protection, I'll walk it gladly." In the hush of the night, she saw not just his scars, but the heart beneath them. And she knew that in the battle between shadows and light, she had chosen someone whose strength was not just muscle, but loyalty, will, and love. Night pressed around the cabin like a heavy blanket. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, throwing dancing shadows on the log walls. Nora sat close to Logan, her back to the warm wall, knees pulled to her chest. Outside, coyotes whispered. Inside, silence spoke louder than any words. She thought of all the nights, all the moments, that had accumulated into something she could no longer deny. It was not fear that made her heart race when he approached, but gratitude mingled with something deeper, something unspoken. Logan shifted beside her. He poked at coals, sending a flare of orange light. He glanced at her. "Nora," he said, voice low. She looked at him, waiting. "I never asked you to stay," he continued. "You owe me nothing." She shook her head slowly. "I am staying not because you saved me, but because of how you live." Her voice trembled slightly. "Because you respected me when others looked through me. Because you give without demand. Because in your silence, there is honesty." Logan's jaw tightened. He turned away, gaze fixed on the fire. "You are too good for me," he muttered. "Your life should be easier than this. A farm, a town, people who know and care." He stopped himself. He ran a hand through his hair, then looked back. "I worry I am not worthy of you. My past, these mountains, the scars in my soul, they are not gentle things you deserve to carry." She reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Don't say that." He pulled away slightly, voice rough. "If you wanted to leave, if you feel this life is too harsh, I will not stop you. I'll take you down to town tomorrow. No shame, no hesitation. You can go to that society, live under scrutiny, do what's expected." Her eyes filled. She could see his fear, fear of losing her, fear of confessing his own unworthiness. She pressed a small step closer, voice firm. "You would carry me down, just to let me go?" He nodded slowly, eyes dark. "To set you free." She stood up, the firelight dancing on her face, hair loose. She moved in front of him, placed her hand over his chest, right over his heart. "I will not go," she said, voice clear. Her fingers trembled on his shirt. "This is not something I chose for refuge. This is where I choose to stay." She looked into his eyes, fierce and trembling. "Here." He sat frozen, confusion and longing warring in his pale gaze. She stood before him, courageous in that moment. "I will not run again," she said softly. "I will stand by you, not because of pity, not because I must, but because of how you live every single day." He closed his eyes, breathing in. The shadows trembled. Then he reached out and pulled her close, wrapping her arms around her. She rested her head against him, feeling a warmth deeper than fire. He whispered into her hair, "You are braver than I am." She pulled back slightly, looked up at him. "Maybe, but love demands bravery, doesn't it?" He nodded, voice thick. "Yes, it does." Night deepened around them. The wind moaned outside. Inside, two hearts fluttered in sync, no longer uncertain. She had chosen. He had accepted. In the flicker of firelight, they held each other, each stronger for the shared decision, each ready for what would come next. The scent of sawdust filled the air. Morning after morning, Logan rose before the sun, shouldered his axe, and went to work. Where once there had only been a clearing, now logs were taking shape, stacked, carved, measured. It was not just a cabin, it was a promise. Nora stood nearby, watching him shape each beam with patient, powerful hands. He said little, but she saw the care in the way he smoothed the edges, how he measured the window frame not once, but 3 times. "You're building it for me?" she asked softly one morning. He did not look up from the timber. "For us," he said simply. Each day, the shape of a home emerged. 4 solid walls, a proper roof, a window just above the place he planned the table to be, so light could pour in while she read or sewed. He carved her initials into the door frame, not where anyone would see, but where his hand always brushed as he passed. She did not need grand gestures. This was everything. When word reached town that Logan McGraw was building a house for a girl the world had tossed aside, whispers started again. But something was different this time. The blacksmith, who had once muttered behind his beard about wild men and wild girls, now offered to lend nails. The baker's wife sent up flour wrapped in brown paper. Even the mayor tipped his hat when they passed. "Seems that man has done more with silence than most do with speeches," someone said at the general store. Nora began planting small herbs outside the new house. Lavender, thyme, rosemary. Birds nested on the eaves. A red ribbon fluttered from the porch beam. One afternoon, Logan came in with sawdust on his shoulders, holding a small carved box. He placed it in her hands without a word. Inside were 2 rings, simple, wooden bands. One slightly larger, sanded smooth. The other delicate, with a tiny carved mountain flower at its center. "Thought, maybe," he said gruffly, "if you still wanted, we could say the words." Tears stung her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. Plans for a wedding began, not in a church or town square, but on the mountain where they met, where she had stayed, where he had changed. The townspeople, once suspicious, began to gather tools and cloth. A seamstress hemmed a simple white dress. A boy from the stable brought a bouquet of wildflowers. There was no preacher yet, but one would come. And as the sun dipped behind the trees that evening, Nora sat on the step of their not-quite-finished home, watching Logan hang the last shutter. She looked around, at the herbs, the clean porch, the window that would catch the morning light. This was not just shelter, it was a home. Built with hands rough from war and wilderness, carved by love so quiet and strong it never had to be explained. And soon, on this very soil, they would promise not to leave. Not because they had to, but because they had chosen. The morning dawned crisp and clear, the sky a canvas of soft blues and sunlight. On the slope just above the cabin, where wildflowers grew in riotous colors, a small group had gathered, no banners. No musicians, just nature, a scattering of wooden chairs, and the quiet hum of anticipation. Nora stood at the edge of the clearing, dressed in a white gown she had sewn herself. It was simple, stitched with care, each thread a testament to the life she had claimed here. Her hair was braided over one shoulder, dotted with sprigs of lavender. In her hands she held a bouquet of mountain flowers, no 2 alike. As she stepped forward, the crowd fell silent. The old blacksmith gave a nod. The baker's wife smiled, with both hands clasped over her chest. Even the sheriff tipped his hat, his usual frown replaced with something gentler. At the center of the clearing stood Logan, freshly shaven, his best shirt ironed and tucked in, though his boots were still dusty. His hands were clasped in front of him, his shoulders straighter than usual. When he saw Nora, a breath caught in his throat. The priest, a traveling man with a sun-worn face and kind eyes, began to speak. "Marriage is not the union of two perfect souls," he said, voice steady. "It is the bond between two people who choose, every day, to stay, despite their cracks, because of their cracks." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine. Nora met Logan's eyes. "If anyone here objects," the priest continued, "speak now." No one did, only silence, respectful and full. Logan turned to Nora. Instead of waiting for the words, he sank slowly to one knee. He took her hand, small, calloused, shaped by a life of survival and sewing and starting over. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles, then looked up. "These," he said, voice thick, "are the strongest hands I have ever known." Nora's eyes shimmered. Her fingers curled around his, pulling him gently to his feet. "I do," she said. He smiled. "I do." The priest pronounced them husband and wife. The moment hung, soft and golden. Then, without ceremony, Logan swept Nora off her feet, not in a showy gesture, but in one born of instinct. He held her as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Logan," she laughed, startled, but clung to him anyway. "Thought I might steal one dance," he murmured. There was no music, but someone began to hum. Then the blacksmith's daughter clapped her hands to a slow rhythm. A few others joined. And there, in the middle of wildflowers and laughter, Logan and Nora waltzed. It was clumsy. His boots stepped on her hem. She laughed until tears ran. He turned too wide, she twirled too fast. But it was theirs. Children ran between chairs, neighbors clapped along. The sheriff leaned on a fence post, smiling without realizing it. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in gold. On that quiet mountain, where once there had only been solitude, now there was something else: community, celebration, love. And as Logan held Nora close, her head on his shoulder, his cheek against her hair, they did not need to say anything. The mountain had given them peace. They had given each other everything else. If this story stirred your heart, made you smile, or reminded you that even in the wildest corners of the world, love can bloom, then do not forget to hit that hype button and subscribe to the Wild West Love Stories channel. We bring you tales of grit, romance, and quiet heroism straight from the frontier, where love isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Stay with us for more stories, where the winds whisper secrets, hearts speak louder than words, and even the most rugged souls find their way home. Thank you for riding along. And remember, in the Wild West, every love story leaves a trail,